Hello, everybody. Welcome to the program. Welcome to the show. I see we've got a couple hundred people that have entered the chat. Please let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments. What city, what state, what galaxy. And remember to press the thumbs up button, the like button on the video, as it helps the channel. So I have a very special guest and a very good friend with me today, Professor Marandi. He's a professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran, and he's regularly featured on every international news network as a political commentator on Iran and much more. How are you, Professor? It's good to have you.
Hi, Richard. I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, I would say it's been rather too long since we last had you, because a lot has happened. A few days ago, you accompanied. Well, it's been more than a week now, I'd say. But you accompanied Iran's President Raisi, on his trip to Indonesia. How was it?
It was a very good trip, and I'd never been to Indonesia before. I had former students from Indonesia who I met one of them who lived near Jakarta, but it was a very interesting trip. It's one of the largest countries in the world. It has a huge population, roughly between 270, 280 million. So the population is more than Pakistan or Brazil. And unfortunately, I think that the relationship between Iran and Indonesia has been neglected in the past, and the two presidents want to rectify that. So the country has huge potential. Iran has huge potential. And although I wasn't a part of any negotiations, I met intellectuals and students and others. But for me, it was an eye opener, and I really enjoyed, even though it was a very brief trip, but I really enjoyed meeting Indonesians in Jakarta.
And why did the president go there? There's the prospect of more economic partnership between the two countries, right?
Yes. Well, Indonesia is growing. There is a lot of poverty in the country, but the country is moving forward now, and Asia is on the rise, and Indonesia is very much a part of that. So there are many reasons for the two countries to work together. Indonesia is also interested in moving away from the dollar. Your viewers may have heard that ASEAN is discussing using local currencies, and that the Indonesians want to replace the MasterCard and Visa card. So you have this general trend across the world, and Indonesia being a very important country, that is something that has extra significance for Iran, because Iran has moved away from the US dollar. Of course, the sanctions have been a huge incentive, and 90% of Iranian trade is done with currencies other than the dollar now. So the Indonesian and other countries that want to move away from the US dollar, that's obviously something that the Iranians would very much welcome. It helps Iran, and Iran would like to help them move in that direction as well.
And this is very interesting what you said, that 90% of Iranian trade is done with the dollar, with currencies other than the dollar, and that Indonesia wants to move away. I think a lot of countries are thinking about that now after the war in Ukraine started. They're thinking about that more seriously. Do you think that there's a prospect of Iran joining BRICS? Perhaps, I don't know whether it's during this August summit or in the foreseeable future, because they've certainly expressed interest. Saudi Arabia's expressed interest. Argentina, Cuba, Syria.
Well, my understanding is that the BRICS countries haven't yet discussed how they're going to expand and what sort of mechanisms they are going to use to expand. And that is going to be a central theme during the negotiations that are to take place in South Africa with the BRICS leaders all participating there. So the summit in South Africa will obviously be will be dealing with different issues, but a central issue will be how to bring in new member states. But Iran is one of the many countries that want to join BRICS, and Iran has friendly relations with all of the current member states. So we'll have to see how that goes. But we do know that Iran has successfully joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The
Right.
Iranians are also discussing with the Russians about a free trade agreement with a series of Central Asian countries and the Russians. So Iran is pushing forward on multiple fronts with regards to business and trade, and all of these are with the global South and with countries that want to move away from the United States. Iran-Russian relations obviously have evolved dramatically. The Russians are very keen on developing the North-South transport corridor, and the Chinese are developing the Belt and Road, which we saw the summit with between the Chinese president and Central Asian governments. And of course, the Belt and Road comes through these countries to Iran, from Turkmenistan ultimately to Iran. So you see these different corridors being developed, and that these are incentives for countries that are, and some of the countries in the BRICS that I think would push them to include Iran in any new grouping that they may decide to create in the future.
I know Iran and Venezuela. They've also developed a very important and extensive relationship in the last couple of years, especially both countries being under sanctions. I don't know if you saw, just I think 2 days ago, Lula, the Brazilian president, received Maduro, I think for the first time in a long time, and he, this act alone, plus Lula mentioning a transition away from the dollar. Did you have any thoughts on that, and the situation in Latin America?
Well, I was invited to Venezuela a couple of months ago, and I spent a week there. I was in the capital the whole time. There was so many things to do, so I never had the opportunity to visit any of the beautiful places in the country, like the Amazon and so on, or the sea. But it was a fascinating trip, and the Venezuelans, despite the hardships, they've done they've done their best to keep the impoverished well fed, and that's something that I saw, how the government supports those who are more vulnerable, and of course they are vulnerable partially at least because of the sanctions. The new relationship that is now being brought back, or let's say the relationship that's being brought back to life between Venezuela and Brazil, and of course among different countries in Latin America, I think is very promising, and it's going to make the Americans very unhappy, and I think they are very unhappy as it is. So the isolation of Venezuela, or the attempt to continue isolating Venezuela by the Americans and by the Europeans, by continuing their attempts to make ordinary Venezuelans suffer, to break the back of the Venezuelan economy, it's going to become much more difficult in future, because Latin American countries, South American countries will be increasingly ignoring Western demands to keep Venezuela isolated. And it's sort of like it's similar to West Asia as well, because we see a similar shift across West Asia. The Saudis, for a host of different reasons, they've chosen to improve relations with Russia, they've chosen to increase their ties with China, and they've chosen to evolve their relationship with Iran. And that has led to rapprochement between most Arab countries, or most Arab governments, and the Syrian government. And we saw President Assad in the Arab League summit. So what we see happening in Latin America is happening in West Asia as well. And I think the reason this is happening is because, I think there are a host of reasons. One is that the United States and Europe continue to decline. And I think that the war in Ukraine and the tensions with China, the unnecessary tensions with China and the unnecessary war in Ukraine, they act as catalysts to quicken the decline of the United States and its allies. And that gives more space for countries in the global south. And of course, when you see presidents or prime ministers come to power in these global south countries that are strong and who want independence from the West, that of course makes it even more difficult for the United States and its allies. Saudi Arabia, when it sees that the United States is growing weak, when they see the United States is unable to, let's say, protect them, or unable to control them, you can interpret it in different ways, or maybe both at the same time, then for their own sake, they, as Westerners say, they want to hedge their bets. They want to have better relations with everyone, to play it safe, or to explore new opportunities. Again, you can look at it both ways. And so the Saudis chose to change their relationship, their relationship with Iran. And I know I'm sort of moving away from the topic a bit, but
no, please go on.
I just want to remind your viewers that the Iranians moved to decrease tensions with Saudi Arabia over 3 years ago, when General Soleimani was on his way to Baghdad and to the Prime Minister's office. The Americans assassinated him at Baghdad International Airport at, I think, roughly 1 a.m. And as we learned later from the former Iraqi Prime Minister, Dr. Adel Abdul Mahdi, he said that General Soleimani was to meet me at 8 in the morning, in other words, 7 hours later, to discuss a letter from the Saudis about decreasing tensions and rapprochement and these sort of issues. So I think one of the reasons why he was assassinated was because the Americans did not want rapprochement. Of course, the Americans also wanted revenge, because General Soleimani led the coalition against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and he was the most important reason for their defeat in Syria and Iraq. But I think it also had to do with the fact that the Americans were adamant on keeping Saudi Arabia and Iran divided. And the Americans have a lot of influence in Iraq, and they know exactly what's going on, so they murdered him. But later on, the Iraqis wanted to mediate again, and progress was made.
There were many meetings.
Yes, and what impeded the reestablishment of relations was that the Saudis wanted Iran to decide on behalf of Yemen, to make decisions on behalf of Yemen, which Iran refused. Ultimately, when the Chinese wanted to broker, at the request of the Saudis, the talks when they wanted to mediate, and the Iranians accepted. The Saudis withdrew that demand,
Right.
and so relations were reestablished. So things are changing, whether you look at Latin America, whether you look at West Asia, or whether you look at East Asia and Indonesia, ASEAN countries, and so on. Things are changing. Things are moving pretty rapidly. When you look at it um, and compare it, the situation today from a few years ago, things are moving forward very fast.
Yeah, you mentioned how the Saudis would come to Iran and say, well, you have to say this and that to Yemen, and they would say, why are you coming to us? You go talk to them yourselves. You know, it's
Yes.
yeah. No,
Now the Saudis have done that, and we saw prisoner exchanges. So the Saudis, if they continue going down this road, they'll benefit. Everyone benefits.
Yep.
And the region will grow more wealthy. And just as we see these changes happening in West Asia, we see these changes happening in Central Asia.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have greater harmony, as the Chinese like to call it, or greater convergence of interests in West Asia, then the link between Iran and Russia that's being established, the North-South corridor or the Belt and Road that goes from Iran to Central Asia to China, the Saudis and other countries in the Persian Gulf and the region could be a part of this. So, and they could, of course, they can also trade with countries in the Persian Gulf as well. So this could help evolve the economies, not only in West Asia, but in Central Asia and in Eastern Europe and across Russia. So and this, of course, is something that the Americans don't want. The Europeans don't want. They want all these countries divided. They want them separated from each other so that they can control them. You know, it's divide and rule, divide and conquer, divide and retain control. That's the general policy. So
Yeah.
as we speak, I have no doubt that the Americans and the Europeans are looking to find ways, and the Israeli regime to find ways to wreck this process of rapprochement, whether it's Iran and Saudi Arabia, or Saudi Arabia and Syria, or Yemen, or the other countries in the Persian Gulf region with these different countries. But so far, the general trend is positive. It's not ideal, but everything is not without problems. But I think so far the general trend is looking promising.
You know, speaking of wrecking the process, what did you think of Zelenskyy just showing up at the Arab League all of a sudden? I mean, that was ridiculous.
I think that the Saudis probably are doing a balancing act. On the one hand, they bring in, President Assad, despite the fact that Qatar and Turkey are very unhappy about this, and the Americans and the Europeans, but they probably allowed Zelenskyy to come as well to sort of balance that and to prevent the Americans from getting too unhappy.
angry.
But I think that Zelensky's speech actually was foolishly constructed, or whoever wrote the speech, I think, was a bit foolish, because Zelenskyy was basically attacking many of the leaders who were sitting at the table.
Yeah.
And if you want to change the minds of these leaders, I don't think that's how he should do it.
It's really funny. He was like lecturing them about resistance and like, what would you do if you had your country invaded? Like the Syrian delegation probably looking at him like that.
Yes, and he was also saying like how you allowed this to happen. Some of the people sitting here, you're silent. But yes, of course, and of course, I don't want to go into history, and your viewers are very politically aware, probably more politically aware than I am. So I don't want to lecture them on things that they know, but there's no comparison between Syria and Ukraine. Syria was a sovereign, independent country, and foreign actors came and helped extremist groups and brought in tens of thousands of foreign fighters. Regardless of what one thinks of the Syrian government, that's completely irrelevant. Syria, whether it's Syria, or whether it's Malaysia, or whether it's Egypt, or whether it's Morocco, foreign fighters were funded and supported, and then or local fighters were funded and supported, and then foreign fighters brought in to create a dirty war. Ukraine was very different. It was a country, a sovereign independent country with an elected president. They overthrew that president, the United States. They supported the ISIS-like groups.
Right.
They supported the right wing, neo-Nazis, Nazis, whatever they want to call it. The Azov battalion or brigade now, and the right sector and all these other groups, just like they did with the Contras against Nicaragua, and how they used Honduras. So, and then of course they started killing Russian Ukrainians and oppressing them. And so there's no similarity between what happened in Ukraine and what happened in Syria or what happened in Palestine. But in any case, Zelensky's speech was not a smart speech.
Yeah. He honestly, if he really wanted to appeal to the Arab leaders, he could have done it. There's a way you could have written that to kind of play on their heartstrings and so on. But I felt it was kind of like, just I'm here now and give me attention, and it was really badly executed. But I suppose he would, he wanted to take a part of this was to take the headlines off of Al-Assad, because he was kind of like the primary subject and topic about anything to do with the Arab League. So now it suddenly became, oh look, it's Zelenskyy. But I definitely agree with you. As part of it was also a balancing act so that the Saudis didn't want the Americans to be too angry. So bring in Zelenskyy. Did you see they want to arrest Putin at the the ICC, they issued this arrest warrant. Now they suddenly go after heads of state. But they've always done that when it comes to African heads of state and Yugoslavian heads of state. But now they've issued an arrest warrant for Putin, and they're kind of pressuring South Africa to execute it at the BRICS summit. And South Africa just kind of gave them the finger and said, no, we're giving everyone blanket immunity. What did you think of all this whole spectacle?
Well, it is ridiculous, and the ICC has discredited itself by doing this. Where are the arrest warrants for Obama and European leaders over Libya, or the arrest warrant over the support they gave in Yemen, or for the dirty war in Libya, in Syria? There are a host of different or the coups in Latin America, Bolivia, that went, the coups that the failed coups, or even the soft coup in Brazil, or the deadly sanctions against Venezuela and Iran. I mean, the suffering in Venezuela is, I think, worse than Iran, even though the sanctions against Iran are more extensive and they're more they've sanctioned everything when it comes to Iran. But the Venezuelans are suffering more. So these are acts of war. There's no difference between bombing a city and silently crushing a nation. Perhaps that's even worse, because it's like it's across the country. It includes everyone. You may bomb a city, and some people may remain unscathed. When it's sanctions, no one is exempt. and people don't see it because there are no
Right.
explosions. It's not something you show on TV. There are no spectacles, if one could call it that, where you see these huge explosions where, because Americans, I don't mean ordinary Americans, but the American media loves these explosions. They love their missiles. What was it? The beauty of their weapons and all that. So with sanctions, you don't see that. So people die in silence. And so where are the arrest warrants for these European and North American leaders, the Canadian Prime Minister or the U.S. President? So this is nonsense. It's irrelevant. It's meaningless. And again, in the case of Russia, while I don't like war, but if you put yourself in the place of the Russians, the Americans, they lied. They expanded NATO to the Russian border. They kept moving missiles and nuclear weapons closer to the border. And then they took Ukraine through a coup, and they suppressed Russian-speaking Ukrainians. What would the Americans have done if this was Canada or if it was Mexico? I mean, the Cuba Missile Crisis for the Americans was a key moment in history. So
True.
if they feel that they had the right in Cuba to react, then they have no. I mean, what happened in Ukraine is far. It's much greater than that, because it's not just missiles; it's also crushing the native population that is Russian. They speak the same language. They have the same ethnic roots as the people who live in Moscow.
Sad. Yeah. It's very sad, because I often liken this to, if you saw, for example, a war between Syria and Lebanon, or
Yes. Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
same. You got people with family on both sides of the border, who live and work on both sides. It's so pointless and senseless, and the ripple effect of it, it's causing also food shortages and electricity prices and energy prices going through the roof. I mean, I don't think anyone's unaffected by this.
No, I think I think it's going to get worse for the whole world. The economic situation will deteriorate everywhere. In countries that are extremely poor, it could have devastating consequences, such as starvation, possibly in future. And the issue of grain, the issue of food, and altogether, and the price of fuel, and all of that is going to have huge consequences. And then, of course, Europe is declining. It's when Europe obeys the United States and ignores the interests of its own people, then this is what you get, and it's going to get worse. And the longer, every single day that this war continues is going to bring about further decline in Europe, whether it's deindustrialization, whether it's greater poverty, whether it's more corruption, whether it's more extremism in different countries. It's just going to make things increasingly worse. But so far, those people who are behind the war, they're not showing any sign of changing policy.
There's too much money to make for them. I think, for them to show any change. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Professor, if I may just add, if we could ponder my theory for a moment, or my just for the sake of argument, do you think that whether it's the protests that happened a few months ago in Iran, or this current issue with Afghanistan, do you think that there are some actors that are causing trouble for Iran at home because of Iran's support in terms of drones for to Russia in this Ukraine war. Do you think that there's potential for this?
You mean Afghanistan? You mean the events in the last few days, right?
Right, which I wanted to touch on in a moment, but I'm just sort of speaking broadly.
I don't think it has to do with Iran's support for Russia per se. I think it's a general hostility that the West has always had towards Iran, and they've always tried to undermine Iran. In 2009, when we had elections, they pushed the country towards instability. There was no evidence of fraud in the elections. I was no fan of President Ahmadinejad, and I was not a fan of Mr. Mousavi, but Ahmadinejad won fair and square. It was very clear. But the Americans and the Europeans and their people in Iran and the people who they funded, they tried to push for confrontation and instability, and that's what they did recently as well with the demise of Mahsa Amini. They tried to create instability in the country. They used it as a pretext, but they had already been preparing themselves for 2-3 years. We knew in Iran that around that time when the riot started, that something was about to happen. Because it was also the anniversary of riots that had taken place 3 years earlier because of the sudden rise in gasoline prices in the country. So they were expecting something, but but what happened was that Mahsa Amini passed away, and then immediately they started claiming that she was beaten. I don't want to go over this because I think I've already explained this before, but they immediately said that she was tortured and murdered and beaten to death, and BBC Persian and all these Western Persian language media outlets repeated it. And then there was this unprecedented online campaign against Iran. Yeah. But then the footage came out.
I couldn't see anything, and
one things about the hijab law or the headscarf law. That's another thing altogether. But there was no. She was not when she was not. She didn't have handcuffs. She had no sign of any physical beating. She was in a hall sitting among other people, and then she stood up, and then she collapsed. And then in the autopsy, where important physicians, famous physicians in the countries participated, there was no sign of physical abuse. There was also a clip where the physicians told her father to touch her head and to see if he thought there was any problem, and he said no. He knows there is no physical trauma, and he said there that when she was a child she had an operation, something that he denied later on, but she did have an operation. The hospital documentation was all there. So what happened was that the Americans and their allies, they manipulated a tragic event to try to undermine the country. And then during those 3 months, the Persian TV channels in the West were calling for violence. I tweeted some of these things.
Yeah, I remember. Yep.
And I tweeted the clips, and I tweeted the violence as well. And
it was disgusting, honestly.
They were advocating. They were saying, kill these people. And they were saying it's a moral duty to kill these people. And these TV stations are based in London and based in the West. If it was directed to an English-speaking audience, they would be shut down immediately, and they would be taken to court and put in jail. But when it comes to Iran, it's fair game. Yeah. So, and then all that aside, when the anniversary of the revolution when it was the anniversary of the revolution, the rallies across the country, because all cities in Iran have their own rallies.
They're enormous.
Enormous. They were far larger than they were in the last few years, because people were, sick and tired of these violent riots. So these were not peaceful protests. The first couple of days, there were peaceful protests across the country because many people believed that she was beaten and killed. I initially thought probably something like that happened because the news was, it was like one-sided, and it sounded like it could be true. But then people began to see through the propaganda and the lies, and they saw that, it was a tragic event, her demise. But the riots that began after 2 or 3 days, which also, by the way, caused many of the protesters to go home because they didn't want to be a part of the riots. But the rioters, who were led by foreign-funded groups, they claimed that themselves. The MEK terrorist organization, they were involved in the riots, and the terrorist groups in Iraqi Kurdistan, they were involved in the riots. These are claims that they would make themselves. This is not so. These are Western-funded groups and organizations that were all involved. So the point is that the Americans, whether it was 2009 or whether it was 3 years ago during the riots over fuel prices, or whether it's over any Massa Amini or anything else, they will use that to create instability in the country, just like they did in Venezuela a few years ago as well.
Yeah.
They, wherever they can do it, they'll do it. So I don't think it's because of Russia, but I think it's because they just want Iran to cease to exist, or at least they want to see I'm sure they don't want to see a strong Iran to exist altogether, whether they'd like to see the country divided or broken. They just don't want a strong and independent Iran.
Yeah, if I may, just as an analogy, I recall Syria. There was also the same kind of plan where they would take something, exaggerate it, and then use it as a pretext to kind of just get people enraged against the government. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's incredible because they always say the security forces in, be it Russia or Iran or Syria, are brutalizing the people. I mean, I've seen more videos in the United States of the police beating people up, most of them black, and there's
France.
Yeah, exactly. The CRS, which are notorious for being, violent since before I was even born. It's interesting how no one.
Of course, the best example would be the Israelis, who kill Palestinians on a daily basis.
Right, on video, on tape, the whole time. And if you say anything, you're a terrorist, you're anti-Semitic, or this and that. But if you want to attack the security forces in Iran and Syria, it's perfectly fine. This is a double standard, no matter what someone's views are on every issue. But the double standard is there. It's unequivocal. So. Yeah, I think I certainly see your point, because as I point out many times to the viewers, Iran basically used to be a colony where the especially the UK and the US were just sucking oil out of Iran. They were bleeding Iran dry, taxing it, making it pay. It's kind of like in India, where they made the Indians pay for their own trains so that we could steal stuff from India and plunder it. Yeah, and since the revolution, like you said, seeing a strong Iran, this is outrageous in Washington and Whitehall. So I guess any reason is a good reason to stir trouble.
And that's what the sanctions are for, by the way. The sanctions, whether it's Cuba or Iran or Venezuela or Syria,
right,
or Yemen or whatever country it may be, Nicaragua, the objective is to create suffering, to bring people to their knees, to crush nations, to kill children, to destroy jobs and families, and tear the fabric of society, so that people rise up in despair.
Yeah.
So they say, okay, we will, we'll just overthrow them, and maybe the Americans will let us live. So on the one hand, they try to strangle societies, and then on the other, they have their terrorist groups to intervene, and then they have this this very powerful media, whether it's Persian or Spanish or whatever, or Arabic, that will mobilize and create division and rumors, And so all these combined, it's a very effective force. And that's how they tried to bring down these different countries. So,
Yeah.
but in the case of Iran a few months ago, the online campaign was even greater than what we saw in Ukraine. It was quite extraordinary. But they failed. And the reason why they failed was because Iran has popular legitimacy, whether they like it or not. The Islamic Republic of Iran, whether you like it or hate it, and I think many people who hate it don't know what it is that they're hating, but in any
Right.
case, it has popular legitimacy. And as I said, during the anniversary on February the 11th, you had millions of people on the streets of Tehran. But these were not people who came in from other cities, because in each city they had their own enormous rallies. It's not, I don't, that sort of popular support, people who would, a sanctioned people, many who don't have jobs, maybe many have, they would take their holiday and spend the whole holiday going from one side of the city to another to participate in rallies where you get stuck in traffic for hours, and you have to, it's not like going to the park.
Yeah.
That shows the degree of dedication and popular support that the Islamic Republic has. Having said that, if you come to Iran and you speak to people, people will be dissatisfied. You can just get in a taxi and they'll, say all sorts of things against the government, against the president, against the leader, against anyone. It's Iran is far more open than than any other country in this region, to be very blunt. And Iran, despite having all these external antagonists, because when you have all these external antagonists who are funding groups, you put up your guard. You're more careful. You can't behave in a normal manner because they're trying to undermine you. But despite that, you just go in a taxi and say, "What do you think?" The driver will say whatever he wants. If you go to a park, if you go to a university, even right now on campuses, students, they go and protest on campus. At the height of the riots, we had 200, 300 students protesting almost every day, or at least once or twice a week. Of course, the University of Tehran has like 50,000 students, 50 to 70,000 students, because there's also the sister university for medical sciences that we have. But the point is that people you have websites that are hostile to the government in Iran. And then, of course, there's all that BBC Persian and VOA and Deutsche Welle and all those Western outlets, or Iran International, that are hostile too. But the point is that it's very different from what Westerners say. So there's a lot of there's a lot of popular legitimacy in the country, and therefore the mobilization of all those capabilities that the West has put together, it fails.
Yeah. I absolutely see your point, Professor. And once again, if I can draw an analogy, because you said that there were these scores of people coming out in support on the anniversary of the revolution. If you look at in Yemen, for example, all the people that would come out, they will never show that on TV, or in Syria, the people coming out in support of the government. It was much more, but you wouldn't see that put on television here, because it doesn't fit the narrative, because they try to claim that the governments in these countries don't have, as you said, popular legitimacy, which isn't true. Of course, they do, but it doesn't fit the narrative, so they don't show it.
Yes, in Yemen, they would always say this is a proxy war, as if this is between Iran and Saudi Arabia. No, this was between Saudi Arabia and Yemen.
Right.
And the reason why this is not Iran is because Yemen, which is surrounded, they're surrounded, and the Saudis were waging war with the help of NATO countries and others. They were unable to take the capital. And then you would have regular demonstrations in the capital, where literally millions of people would come to the streets to support the government in Sana'a, to condemn their antagonists, or to condemn Israel.
Yeah.
So, you know, the West tries to close their eyes to this reality. Or in the case of Syria, in 2013, Hezbollah and Iran and their allies, and Iran's other allies, they came in to help. 2 years after this began, not in 2011 or 12, in the summer of 2013 was when they began to get involved. Why? Because by this time, Turkey and NATO and countries in the Persian Gulf, they had brought in tens of thousands of foreign fighters already to fight in Syria. They had already brought in tens of thousands of foreign fighters.
It was an open border.
And many of these people came from London. I know people in London who went to the police. I know a person, a young man, who's told me himself that he and other members of his extended family went to the police, and they said, look, in our local mosque or in this center or whatever, they're trying to, encourage my cousin to go to Syria. And then the police would say, we're on it, don't worry about it, go home. But they wouldn't let them do this because NATO was a part of this dirty war.
Yeah.
They were facilitating the recruitment, whether in London, whether across the UK, whether in France, whether in Belgium, across Europe.
Yes.
They were facilitating this. And they were facilitating the movement from North African countries and West Asian countries to go to Jordan, but especially in Turkey, and through Turkey into Syria. This was all done through the cooperation of intelligence organizations across NATO and beyond NATO. So despite this, the Syrian government didn't fall. Iran couldn't, and then of course the Russians came in 2015, 4 years after the dirty war started.
Yeah.
So the Iranians came in 2 years afterwards. Hezbollah, Iran, the coalition of groups that were supporting the Syrian government, they came, and the Russians. But with all the support, if the Syrian government did not have popular legitimacy, they couldn't have stopped the fall of the government. You had tens of countries working together to bring down the state, and you had literally all of the Arabic media, and you had sanctions, and you had NATO countries funding and giving excellent weapons to they would use anti-tank weapons. They had so many anti-tank weapons and anti-tank missiles that they would use them to target individual Syrian soldiers.
Yeah, like
Iranian soldiers.
Yeah.
But and as you know, I would go to Syria regularly from late 2012 or 2013 and 14, 15, every year, 2, 3, 4 times. I didn't fight, but I would go to universities, speak to students, speak to academics and others, and go around the country. I would go into Damascus University on my own. I'd have discussions with students. I'd feel completely safe and secure. And the biggest question that I would get, especially during 2013, 14, and 15, was, will you stay with us? Will you? And many of them loved President Assad. Many of them liked President Assad. Many of them were critical of President Assad. And you could tell that there were a significant number of them that didn't like him. But they didn't want what the Americans and NATO and the Turkish government and the regional governments, what they had to offer.
Yeah.
So you had different voices in Syria, but they did not want what the Americans and the Europeans and NATO and others were trying to impose on them. So it failed. It failed in Venezuela. They did the same thing in Venezuela. They did the same thing in Bolivia. They used Bolivia is a good example. They tried to pretend that there were voting irregularities. They helped bring about a coup. They supported the coup, but because the fact was that people were the government had popular support, the government that was overthrown, the people didn't let them get away with it.
Yeah.
So the West, and I think all of these are signs of the decline of the West too. I think it shows that people are awakening or waking up across in different parts of the world, or whether majorities or minorities, I don't know, but you could, significant numbers, in significant numbers, people are more politically aware than before. But also, I think the West and its allies are on the decline. So what I was saying earlier, these new spaces are being opened up for resistance.
Right. Yeah. I mean, very, very. You put it excellently and so eloquently, because if they were able to overthrow these governments, I mean, you can't do it unless you actually have people in that country basically giving way and allowing the coup to succeed. But like you said, I try to reinforce this point that even if people have disagreements with their government in Syria or Venezuela or Bolivia, it doesn't mean that they accept NATO coming in and replacing their legitimate government with, in the case of Syria, ISIS. I mean, no one in their right mind would want that. And I think it's insane how, in England, we harass journalists at the border, but when it comes to the ISIS fighters, we just let them go to Syria and destroy the country, right? That says a lot by itself.
Yeah. So they question Grayzone Grayzone journalist. They still have his, from what I understand, they still have some of his I don't know his I don't know, I don't know if they have his cell phone still, but they've taken all of his information.
Yeah,
and they may use it against him in court in future. So this is sort of like a sword hanging over his head, to intimidate.
There's a French journalist who
that was a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and they were basically saying, did you participate in the protests in Paris against Macron? What do you think about the French president? This is in England. Who cares about the French president?
British journalist was the Grayzone journalist was asked about his views on Russia and on Ukraine, and whether what he was doing was in the interest of it's extraordinary.
Maybe they should have said they're ISIS fighters, and they would let them through.
Oh, absolutely. And if you recall, the CNN journalist went to Idlib. And she had a tour of Idlib with these extremist groups, and she was I don't know if you recall, but she smelled this backpack and said, "Oh, this is
the chemical weapon,
weapons. If they were chemical weapons, then why are you sniffing it?"
Oh man, everyone dies from the backpack, but CNN journalists are immune. They have total immunity. Man, it's like it's like watching a Twilight Zone episode. This all of this stuff. But Professor, I wanted to kind of dive into what's happening with Iran and Afghanistan, because Afghanistan, they basically, again, as everybody knows, NATO and the United States left in 2021. I mean, I say they sort of left because the CIA is obviously still there, and people should remember that the CIA were the first ones to invade Afghanistan. They have a paramilitary faction in the CIA, and those were the first troops in Afghanistan. It's not like Iraq. It's actually a bit different. But in any case, the situation is very precarious. I mean, people have been suffering for 20 years under occupation. They're barely reeling from it. So how does this whole situation with Iran come into play now, especially with all this American equipment that's left over in Afghanistan? Just give us kind of the basic facts, if you'd please.
Well, the Americans definitely have a role to play, and they are, by using sanctions, they forced the Taliban to abide by some of their demands. That's so in order to let a limited amount of money to enter the the central bank of Kabul. But what we saw recently, basically what happened was when the Americans were leaving Afghanistan and the government was about to fall, the Iranians had a choice. They either fought against the Taliban or they tried to help the country remain peace and stable. Now, some in Iran wanted Iran to go to war with the Taliban. And actually, they were liberals. They were the pro-Western liberals who were saying that we should, go to the defense of the Tajiks, who are Persian speakers, the Hazaras, who are predominantly Shia, and the Uzbeks and others, and and support them because they together are more than 50%. The Pashtuns, or the Taliban is basically Pashtun. They're 40%, roughly 40% of the country. Of course, the Pashtuns are two different, broadly speaking, tribes, but that's a different story. So these people were sort of, and it's sort of ironic because the people who are calling for Iran to wage war against the Taliban, they were totally against the Russians in Ukraine. So the people who in Iran were saying we should go to war with the Taliban were also supporting NATO in Ukraine. But their logic is not dissimilar to the logic of the Russians. These people were saying we should go to the support of the Persian speakers, and well, why not the Russians support Russian speakers? But yeah, that hypocrisy is aside. The Iranian government said, look, we have to keep Afghanistan peaceful, and it's had enough war. And the Taliban agreed to leave people alone. And to a degree, they didn't abide by all their commitments, but to a degree they did. They didn't carry out the mass murders that they did in the 1990s, for example. In the 1990s, they were brutal.
Yeah.
But this time around, they were, more sane, less brutal. And the Taliban is not one ideology. You have these moderate groups, and then you have the more radical groups, the Haqqani network, and so on.
Yes.
But all that aside, recently a couple of things happened. One is that the Taliban has been preventing water from entering Iran. They prevent the water from coming, water that Iran legally should receive from
the Helmand River, right?
Exactly, yes. Based upon international law and bilateral agreements and commitments made by the two sides. The Taliban says there is no water. The Iranians have shown satellite footage and said there is water, but if you say there's no water, then let's take our experts to see it, or technical experts to see what the problem is, and the Taliban said no. So that's one issue. The Iranians, on the other hand, have because this whole water issue has been going on for a long time, the Taliban is trying to create an artificial crisis in the east and southeast of Iran through preventing ordinary Iranians in that part of the country from being able to use water. So the Iranians said, okay, if that's how you're going to do things, then we're going to build a wall, sort of like Trump's wall, going to Mexico. So the Iranians began to build a wall. I mean, the parts of the wall were already built, but they wanted to complete it. And this wall would be very devastating for the Taliban, because Iran is a country where many things are heavily subsidized. Heavily subsidized. So, for example, how much does a liter of gasoline cost in Vienna?
I don't know. I
know you don't have a car, but roughly speaking,
I can tell you California, because most of the viewers are Americans. They were giving me the estimates. I think the worst they got was like $7 a gallon.
well, in your city it's more expensive, but in Iran, the price of gasoline is there are two prices. They have two different prices. It's between 3 cents and 5 cents.
Come on, this
Right?
is heaven.
So if you say a gallon, each liter, 4 liters is a gallon. I think the
Right.
Canadian gallon is
I
5.
don't
but-
use imperial system, but
Yeah, okay. So we'll leave it at that. But for every liter, it's 3 to 5 cents. Now, the Taliban, they would smuggle basically free fuel into Afghanistan, and other things in Iran are subsidized as well, such as many things, because the government gives all sorts of subsidies. So the Afghan government, the Afghan economy, not the government, it needs heavily subsidized Iranian fuel. So the Iranians are saying, well, if you don't give us our water, then sorry if I keep looking up because I think the screen, you can see the screen on my glasses, but the Iranians saying, if you're not going to give us our water, then you can't have our subsidized gasoline, and you can't have our other subsidized goods, and the only way you can get it will be from the official border
I see.
entry points and exit points. And so the one place where they were building a wall a few days ago, the Taliban started shooting at those people who were working to build the wall, to complete the wall. And that's where the conflict started. And it was a few hours. 2 Iranian soldiers were killed inside Iranian territory. Then the Iranians began to shell the Taliban. I think a significant number of them were killed, and a lot of their assets were destroyed because the Iranians were able to shell deep inside of Afghanistan, of course. So that episode, though, ended after a few hours, and things are stable now. And also there's the issue of smuggling drugs, because Afghanistan, thanks to the Americans and thanks to all these dirty wars, it is
opium production has gone up.
Wherever the Americans are, whether it's the Golden Triangle in East Asia, or whether it's Afghanistan and West Asia, or whether it's Colombia and South America,
the drugs always flow.
For some reason, that's where you can find the drugs. Right. But in any case, the Taliban and groups affiliated to the Taliban, or groups tolerated by the Taliban, they export drugs through the Iranian border, and that's another reason why they're building the wall. I think the wall, though, will be completed in a few months. So it's going to put a lot of pressure on the Taliban to think more seriously about allowing the flow of water after the wall.
So is the basically the idea is temporary, as if the flow of water resumes, right? Because as you said, this is something that was settled decades ago, and as you said, it's grounded and rooted in international law that you can't just cut off a flow of water and into another country and so on. So the idea is that if they let the experts go into Afghanistan and really make sure that there's no water, or if the water starts flowing again, then the wall won't be completed. Is that the idea?
No, I think the wall will be completed. I think that's a decision that's been made.
So it's decided on. That's it.
Yeah, it's decided on. But I think what will happen is that the flow of goods through the official corridors will be more easily facilitated, and so the trade and business will be able to continue as normal. But the Taliban, in any case, are not going to benefit the way in which they did in the past with semi-open borders.
Right. So there's no turning back now.
No, it's not dissimilar to the Trump wall.
Where is it, by the way? I always wondered what happened to that thing. He made such a big deal about it.
They're still building it. I think they're still building it.
Oh, really? Yeah. That's
and Turkey has also built a wall alongside the Iranian border. It's almost complete.
Oh, yeah?
because a lot of the refugees that come from Afghanistan, they pass, some of them, many of them, most of them are in Iran. Some of them go through to Turkey, or some from Pakistan go to Turkey, or from, so the Turkish government has been building a wall alongside the Iranian border as well. It's it's a sad reality, but once there's a wall, I don't see how it's going to be easily removed.
I mean, the one in Berlin did come down.
Yeah,
That's a different matter.
that was a small wall. So this is
It was a small one built overnight.
Iran-Afghanistan border is like 900 kilometers, so
Yeah.
it's different.
No,
But I think more than half of the wall has been built.
Okay, and how long has this been going on for, the building of the wall? Because it didn't just start yesterday.
No, I think what happened is that this wall was built over years. It was built in bits and pieces in different places, like, let's say, where heroin
Right.
would be brought in. So these areas which were especially vulnerable, they would build a small wall, let's say, there to impede smuggling. Then they would find new ways to get in. So they built bits and pieces of the wall here and there. And then gradually it grew bigger and bigger. But because of the huge amount of gas, I mean, imagine if let's say, alongside let's say in Austria, you have gasoline at, let's say $2, I think it's less, but $2 or $1.50 per liter of gasoline, and then next door you have a country where it's 3 cents or 5 cents, or
no one's going to be buying much.
Yeah, people are going to be, the smugglers will be making billions of dollars. So
yeah,
the Iranians feel that as long as these subsidies exist, then they have to have this border.
Yeah. Okay. I understand. You mentioned Turkey building a wall, and I immediately I thought the nerve. Maybe Syria should build a wall after all the terrorists they let in from Turkey, from Europe and into Turkey. I mean, they really got some nerve sometimes. But that's another issue. What you talked about. Although I still feel some kind of recoil because the refugees that are coming from Afghanistan, this is NATO, and Turkey is a NATO country. Maybe they should, instead of building a wall, they should actually leave NATO or try to change NATO policy. I just find it kind of sad, because
I think, I don't know the exact numbers, but right now there are millions of Afghan refugees in Iran. Those who wanted to come in they're basically in the country already. I think I don't want to say the numbers here because then some people may quote me and I may be wrong, but there are many millions of Afghans right now. And the Taliban, through mismanagement, through corruption, through for a host of different reasons, they've been driving people out of the country. I personally don't think the Taliban will last for much longer. I think that if they continue down this road, preventing girls from going to school, antagonizing other ethnic groups, whether it's the Uzbeks or the Tajiks and others, and by mere mismanagement, they're not going to gain global recognition. When they do these sort of things, or when they prevent nations from accessing water, this is not sustainable. And the situation in Afghanistan is really, really bad. So hopefully it will get better. Hopefully they'll come to their senses. But if they don't, I don't think that it will last. Ultimately, you're going to see tribes and groups and people and cities that, they're going to they're going to rise up, and then these people will, they'll be removed. They were easily removed from power when the Americans invaded, but the Americans really didn't invade. The Americans only bombed a few places here and there. So you had what they called the Northern Alliance move in. And the reason for that was that people didn't want them, at least in the north of Afghanistan. people didn't want them. So if they want to keep the country stable and whole, and that's what Iran wants,
Yeah.
best way to do it is let girls go back to school and be more
Yeah.
inclusive, include the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the Hazaras, and others, and to abide by their commitments to neighbors, and then things would be very different. But so far, that's not what we're seeing.
Yeah, I find it ironic because you mentioned girls not being able to go to school in Afghanistan, and literally just next door in Iran, I think you have more female students in universities than male students. Is that correct?
Yes, and college, for example, in my faculty, the dean of my faculty is a woman. I've been in this faculty for 20 years now. Yeah, yes, 20 years roughly. And 16 of those 20 years that the dean of my faculty have been women. So it's not as if like women don't play an important role. In Iran, there are women scientists, there are women pilots, there are
Yeah.
women taxi drivers, there are women truck drivers, there are women academics, there are women, there are business women. I mean, Iran is no utopia, neither is Austria, neither is the United States, but it is definitely not what you read and hear about in the West.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it good to point that out because we were talking earlier about the kind of portrayal of Iran in the West, how it's they oppress women and this and that. But I mean, if you look at, as you just mentioned, the inclusiveness and ironically, sadly, compared to Afghanistan just next door, I mean, and even compared to the utopia West, Iran is leagues
Well, it's
ahead.
the
And
West. Yeah, it's the West that is oppressing Iranian women through brutal and deadly
exactly,
sanctions.
exactly.
It's
They
the
don't tell
West
you
that's
that.
oppressing Syrian women by supporting ISIS and Al Qaeda. It's the West that supported ISIS and Al Qaeda that allowed them to
Yeah,
go into Iraq, and in Yemen, Al Qaeda and ISIS were also involved in this large coalition against. It's the West is oppressing women in Venezuela and in Cuba and in across Latin America. When they oppress nations, they are oppressing women more than others because women are, for a host of reasons, more vulnerable. So
yeah,
for them to speak about, and Iran has a different view about women. The Iranians believe that in the West they've sexualized women, they've commodified women, and that Iran sees itself against that. Now, many in the West may disagree about the sexualization of women in the West or the commodification of women in the West. But the point is that this is the Iranians have their own worldview. But that worldview doesn't mean that women don't become scientists. That doesn't mean that women don't become government ministers. That doesn't mean that women don't become powerful businessmen or business women in the country. Of course, personally, I since I'm a bit left leaning, powerful business people should have there should be a limit to how much power they have. But in any case, women and men can are involved in business. You go into shops and women are there. But in any case, the point that I'm making is that the West is which, as you point out, they try to present themselves as utopian. They're not utopian, neither at home nor abroad. And those who view the world differently have their own argument. It's not
yeah,
as if they're just some, to say that this, it's just caricaturing Iran, saying, oh, they're afraid of women, or they want to keep women isolated. As you pointed out, most of our students are women. Many of our academics are women. Many of our top scientists are women, and I think a couple of pilots actually who flew the president. I'm not sure about this, but I may be wrong. Flew the president's plane on one of the internal flights were the pilot and the co-pilot were women. I may be wrong about that, but we do have pilots and co-pilots that are women on commercial airlines in the country.
I don't think I've ever seen a female pilot in the West, or ever. Actually, I've not flown around the world like, many times. So now that you mentioned it, how come? Why?
Well, I don't fly a lot in the country. I don't recall being on a plane. I don't recall really seeing the pilots all that much, but I haven't seen these female pilots, or at least I don't recall seeing them. But they are there. I mean, I don't want to say that the Iranians have many more female pilots.
I understand. Yeah.
But yes, you are absolutely correct. In the West, they speak as if like at the table it's all 50-50, and that's not the case. But we do have women in all these areas, whether helicopter pilots or airplane pilots or taxi drivers. Just 2-3 weeks ago, I was in a taxi. The driver was a woman.
Same thing. I don't recall ever being in a taxi where the driver was a woman, whether it's in London or in Syria. Or it's weird now that you mention it.
That I have personal experience. So unlike the airplane.
Yeah. No. I wanted to kind of go through these this tweet.
It was one of those app taxis you get through an app. Yeah.
Well, Professor, I wanted to look at these tweets that you had with Mehdi Hassan, because it's I think it's relevant to you were talking about Iran with him, and I mean it's quite the argument. It goes back and forth, and so I'm not sure which ones to show. I'll start with this one because I think it was the first one I read, and I obviously went back and forward. It goes on for a bit, but it's funny because the first thing that popped up was this video where it's this one. So I think this is the first time I ever saw you on TV. It's when he interviewed you about two years ago, I think 3 years ago, and you were talking about Syria, and you kind of schooled him, to put it mildly, and then he starts getting very, he starts going back and forth and saying, that you're inconsistent and so on. I mean, walk us through this thing, because
well, this began, I think, with a tweet of mine where I criticized him for the way he treated Matt Taibbi.
Right.
And I said I've had similar experiences with him, because he doesn't debate you, he drowns you out.
Yeah.
He's constantly interrupting you. He prevents you from, talking. And that's not how you win arguments. That's how you silence
it's Western media
adversary, or that's one way of doing it. You just speak. You're a fast talker, and I think that's it. Yeah. So and he went and attacked me for that. Some appeaser of a despotic and evil regime, and whatever. I'm not sure I can read that.
So he was basically saying that
yes, long-standing defender of the Iranian government, the Iranian government. You can't make this. So
how is that even comparable? I mean, Twitter. First of all, if I may just interject, the State Department literally used Twitter as a vehicle to try, maybe they thought they could do it, to try and in 2009 to overthrow the government in Iran, number one. And I think the Twitter files, I mean, they they carry so much more weight than any kind of argument that he's making. He was basically saying that people in Iran have to use a VPN because Twitter is banned and so on. That was basically his argument, right?
Just like the EU is threatening to ban Twitter now, even though Twitter belongs to an allied country.
Yeah, and they already banned RT and Press TV.
Gradually banned in the West, for the same reasons that Iran has concerns. But the point here is that even in this tweet, Mehdi Hassan says, "I defend the Iranian government." Well, Mehdi Hassan is, if you look at it from that perspective, he's defending the American government. So defending the American government, or meaning the Biden administration, is somehow acceptable, but defending Iran is not. So automatically he's sort of saying, he's discrediting me as some sort of evil person, which is fine. But
I take issue with this.
But I'm indifferent to it. But if you look at the subsequent tweets, he becomes increasingly irrational and hostile, and and he clearly has no clue about anything in Iran. He says, say something critical of Iran, because I know you can't say something, otherwise you'd be arrested or something. He implies that.
Yeah, that's what he said.
I mean, and if you just get in a bus in Iran, if you go and sit in the underground in Iran, or the metro, as they say, in Iran, or if you go and sit in a taxi, you'll know that what he says is completely ridiculous. If you teach in a class in Iran, you know that it's just some silly caricature of reality. And yes, I defend Iran. Of course I defend Iran. If Mehdi Hassan and MSNBC gives me a 1-hour show a day, I promise I'll criticize Iran for 15 minutes. And then I'll use the other 45
go to work.
minutes. I only get to speak on TV for 5 minutes every, on CNN 5 minutes every few months, or on BBC 10 minutes every year, so very rare do I get the opportunity. I may be speaking here and there, but when you look on average in the West, the Iranians don't have a voice, the Syrians don't have a voice, the Venezuelans don't have a voice.
Right.
No one who's critical really has a voice. We're just token representatives. So of course, if I'm going to have 5 minutes or 10 minutes or even half an hour, I'm going to defend Iran against this vicious empire that sanctions and kills and carries out dirty wars. Of course I'll do that.
You're going to use it wisely. Yeah.
Yeah, but if they give me a 1-hour show on MSNBC, I'll promise to criticize it.
Right, exactly. And I said at the beginning of the program that you've been on, countless networks, and I'm actually glad that they always have you, but the problem is that they don't let you speak long enough. They just cut you off the whole time, and when you do make a point where they have no response, they just change the subject, say, "Oh, sorry, we're out of time, that's all we have." It's like you said, it's like they just try to make themselves look like they're inclusive, but they just trash you, and
that's if it's live. If it's not live, they will be very, they're often, in their editing, they're very careful to take out the best parts.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. And when you were on BBC, I think it was BBC Hard Talk, didn't they kind of remove the episode or something? It wasn't, you couldn't see it on the website anymore. This is a year ago or something like that.
Yes, that's right. That's right. They did that. That was when I was in Vienna.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
For example, more recently I was on Deutsche Welle, and it was a very very harsh interview, and I think I was probably more harsh with the interviewer Tim Sebastian than I've been on any other show. But Mehdi Hassan's tweets were really, they were quite silly, saying you cannot say anything in Iran, you cannot, and that even Fox News, that sounds like the worst of the neocons. That sounds like John Bolton. How did Mehdi Hassan get to where he is? Why is he sounding like Bolton now?
Yeah.
What's wrong? I don't know.
No, this is It's funny, most if you scratch a liberal, the neocon bleeds. I think I've heard this phrase before, but they, he's.
I mean, I don't make any real distinction between Democrats and Republicans.
I don't
but
either.
Some people are like Lindsey Graham or
God.
Bolton. They're unique. And then when people like Mehdi Assad start sounding like the worst of the worst, because when you present Iran in this very dystopian manner, as if it's like this, then you're justifying dirty war. Because if he's outraged with Iranian government, and obviously he's never been to Iran, he knows nothing about Iran, but then he should be much more outraged at what the American government does to Iran. He should be screaming, bloody murder, as they say.
Yeah.
He'd lose his show immediately, and he knows that. So I find it very odd that he would go that far. I mean, if he says, yeah, Iran is not a good country and, the regime is this, that's fine, because I'm used to this sort of nonsense. But, he's taken it a lot further. And that's what I found very interesting. But his tweets were very, I mean, if people read them, I think they'll enjoy them. Exchange.
Yeah, I don't know what to show next. I mean, it's kind of like he moved to the U.S. and became a citizen. Is that correct? So he
that's right.
Right, and you yourself, you were born in the United States, so you were having this exchange with him about that. You basically you studied in the West and then returned, but he just he's there. He's not budging and not criticizing the West and all this, right?
Yes, what I was basically saying was because he celebrated getting his passport. I have nothing against, people immigrating to the West or whatever. I mean, I find it difficult. I mean, I've seen online the sort of oath that people have to take to get American citizenship, and I think that's I would never say that oath. But I can understand people who are desperate or who want to go to the United States. They say, well, I have to take that oath or something like that. But for him to celebrate his citizenship, I thought was completely unnecessary. I think there's nothing to celebrate. I mean, he's giving taxes to the worst government in the world, the most cruel and oppressive government on this planet. And, if he has to move to the United States or if he has to get American citizenship, I have no problem with that. Many people have immigrated, many people have American citizenship. But, on the one hand, for him to sort of, be so celebratory about it, and then to be so abusive towards global South countries at the same time, and then be working for MSNBC and have that, for me,
right,
there's something wrong with that.
Yeah. I mean, most of the viewers on the program are American, so, and, as I said, Professor, you're born in the U.S. And I'm British, and so this is not the issue whatsoever. But he is the way he speaks, where he, now I mean, I've seen many marvelous clips of him talking about Palestine, for example. He defends the Palestinians, but the way he speaks now about Iran, about all these global South countries that are being targeted by Western foreign policy, it's like he takes no issue with it, and I find it hard to believe. I just don't get it,
There are fantastic Americans. There are Americans who are, who we should all be proud of, who stand up for what's right. There are many immigrants in the United States who are very good people and decent people,
absolutely,
whether citizens or not. But for him to, to speak in this way, to be so celebratory about getting his passport, and at the same time, make all these arguments that he makes, and to attack other people, it's a bit.
It comes across weird. Yeah,
it's very strange. I don't recall the exact tweets, what the wordings were, but what my response was, and the context. But it was just a flowing argument. I mean, you'd have to see, like, I think maybe 15 or 16 exchanges between him and me.
Yeah. Again, I'm just putting some of these on the screen. Bill O'Reilly tagged. It's funny. I also remember Bill O'Reilly. What a guy! This guy's like again a caricature. You know, he's no, the tweets are very funny
because he sounds like Bill O'Reilly. I mean, that's the sort of logic. You know, what is it? Browbeating your sort of constantly attacking the person in front of you, and then giving these presenting something that's not really logical as logical. And he says, you cannot speak in Iran. So the person who reads the tweet, he's never been to Iran. She's never been there. So they're assuming that you can't say in Iran. So one thing I did was I put in a link of an interview that I did in Persian for like 3 hours. I said, go read it. There was criticism of the government there. And so he just ignores it. And I actually didn't use YouTube. I use that's it. I use an Iranian website.
Very good.
So it's sort of like the Iranian version of YouTube. Sort of both to say Iran has its own YouTube, but also to tell them you don't speak Persian. So how can you criticize, how can you claim that I cannot criticize when you don't even speak Persian? Yeah, so for example, he spoke about Mousavi, the presidential candidate, and said he's in jail. I said, well, first of all, he's not in jail. I don't remember the tweets anymore, but I said, Julian Assange is in solitary confinement. He was never in solitary confinement. He was at home. He was under house arrest because he led a violent uprising claiming that there was fraud in elections without providing evidence. And people died. And they didn't put him on house arrest then. They put him on house arrest a year and a half later because of something else. But all that aside, Mousavi was in his house with his wife. Julian Assange is in solitary confinement alone. Or he's been in solitary confinement.
He had to get married, and they banned like the photographer from coming in or something. I mean,
if he wants to criticize, if he wants to go down that road and criticize,
you want to talk about prisons?
Mousavi, who was sitting in his house with his wife, for whatever reason. Let's say Mousavi was innocent. Let's say he didn't lead any riots, or he didn't cause riots through dishonest claims. Forget. Let's say he's completely innocent. He's in his house with his wife. Where's Julian Assange? Where's his wife?
Right.
So even when he makes that case, he loses the argument. So even though he likes to present Iran as somehow bad and the U.S. good, what he's doing is the exact opposite. He's basically saying that the United States is presenting itself, is doing worse than Iran.
Yeah, I again,
even by his own standards.
Yeah, exactly. And what I would say is, as I've said before, I didn't see Mehdi Hassan or anyone from MSNBC in the courtroom covering the case. They didn't. It's funny because the mainstream outlets that did cover it and they did very horribly. They were basically stealing my reporting and the reporting of the others who were there. And I know this. Yeah, and the thing is that they were always putting in smears, things that literally had nothing to do with what just happened in the courtroom. They're just completely like, bringing up, oh, he's this and that, and Russia. The case has got nothing to do with Russia.
In the embassy.
Right. It was really disgusting, and mainstream media were nowhere near this. So if they want, you want to talk about imprisoning people, he especially I think I don't know if he was born in England, but basically just being either an American or someone from Britain, the first place you should look is your own government and criticize your own government for this.
Yeah,
they're doing this to Assange.
Another example, I may have said this before somewhere. I probably did, but there's this gentleman in the United States called Sayyid Mahmoud Mousavi in Persian, because we say vav with v, and Arabs say what with like water. So Mr. Sayyid Mahmoud Mousavi led an Islamic center in California, in Los Angeles, in southern Los Angeles, and he was arrested. And as they do it in the United States, they use the IRS, and when you want to destroy people, you have different means of doing it. And long story short, they kept him in solitary confinement for more than 2.5 years. and they intimidated the community. You know how they do it. They go and the FBI comes
Right.
in and reminds people of their visa problems and all that, and and the problems that their children could have, and so that the Muslim community marginalized. So he's in jail, and then after 2.5 years, a lawyer contacts me, an American lawyer who's Jewish. And he says, look, I have this case, and this looks really bad because this guy seems to be innocent, and I need your help. I forgot his name, but he was a gift from God to Mr. Musevi. So he shows me the evidence, and it's like his the card that you when you finish your because in Iran everyone has to serve in the armed forces, all men, not women, and after you served you get an ID card. So they use his ID card that had the
Republican
Revolutionary Guards logo on it,
yeah.
And said this. So he's a guard. Well, everyone in Iran has to serve in the army, whether it's the ordinary
Right. So
army.
he just happened to be in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in the IRGC, and
I mean, this is like a long time ago, so I don't remember the details. Or, for example, he had a letter. He was in he worked in a factory in Khuzestan, near Iraq, and he helped build a platform in the factory for anti-aircraft for an anti-aircraft gun to protect the factory. And he got a letter from the guard saying, "Thank you for building that foundation for the anti-aircraft gun. Why? To protect the factory from Saddam's airplanes and stuff like that." I mean, just he was not in the guards. He was not, anything like that.
Okay.
So they used that to put him in jail and in solitary confinement. Now, this lawyer, again, he was able to free him. He came to Iran to see me, not the lawyer, Mr. Musevi. When he came to see me, he got cancer in prison. So, his tongue was cancerous, so they removed most of his tongue. I couldn't understand most of what he said when he came to thank me for helping him out. And there's also this Iranian in California who I don't know who he is and I don't remember his name, but he helped him out too. And of course, the lawyer, without him, he would never have been free. But he came to thank me basically. And what I understood from what he was, and he died later on because of cancer. So the American government killed him, basically, after all this time in solitary confinement and all that, they killed him, because of neglect and because they kept him in prison, and
man.
Anyway, he told me that there are lots of people in prison because he was taken to a prison out of state, to make it worse, so that people couldn't visit him and all
exactly,
that. This is how I remember it, because I'm growing old and some of these stories are a few years old, so it gets vague. But what he told me was that he said in his prison there were lots of people in jail who had given money to charities in Gaza. So let's say I'm in the United States, I give $100 to this charity in Gaza because the city's been bombed, and then they say, well, you gave money to this charity which is affiliated to Hamas. It doesn't say Hamas on it, it's just some Palestinian charity. I give 100, and so I go to jail. And so a lot of people in the United States, this is how so the IRS goes after people. They go after people for giving money to terrorists and all that, even though you just gave money to some charity. And then they, but this, you don't get this on Al Jazeera. You don't get this, Amnesty International doesn't go after these, cases. So they create this, this image across the world that there's some sort of utopia. And then people like Mehdi Hassan, who are supposed to be a bit different, he's supposed to be, progressive and, whatever that means, and critical. And then he goes, if you say a word about Iran, you go to jail or you go get arrested. And,
I don't even know what to say.
Argue with that. How do you deal with such a person?
Yeah, Yeah, truly. Truly. I remember this video of the NYPD like literally running people over in broad daylight, and I mean, people just shrug it off. It's like, okay, well, it happened, and but it's a free country.
Yeah, like it's just like in war, when Bush invades Iraq or when Obama destroys Libya, they say it was a mistake.
Oh yeah, blunder.
Yeah, blunder, mistake. The Russians don't make mistakes. It's not like a blunder going into Ukraine. It's not like a if it's not your side, they're evil. They're murderers.
Right, war criminals, etc. Yeah,
war criminals. The ICC should arrest them. But it's a policy mistake. It's a mistake. We shouldn't have done it.
Yeah, it's funny, like it's this innocence, like America and Britain are always innocent. We never make mistakes. We are pure in intention and in being, and everybody else is definitely a criminal though, and they're definitely intent on.
And in this mistake, hundreds of Americans, if not thousands, were killed, and of course a few million, Iraqis and others.
Right,
so
right.
A few hundred Americans, and then they say, and also like the millions of other people too.
Yeah.
So they're like not as nearly.
They come afterwards. It's like with Kissinger. They say like he bombed Cambodia without telling Congress. Not he murdered like 100,000 people in Cambodia, which is the
I think roughly in Laos and Cambodia through the vicious bombing campaigns. Roughly, if I'm not mistaken, roughly 1 million people were killed. Or even in our region since 9/11, the recent, I think, what is it, Brown University or
exactly,
study where 3.4 a number of millions, 3-4 million people were killed, and tens of millions of people
refugees
are refugees.
Yeah.
So and the irony is, the irony of course is that the refugees that went to Turkey and President Erdogan sent to Europe, they sort of tilted the balance of power in London and caused Brexit. And, lots of unintended consequences happen. I was once invited on a radio show, I think it was BBC 5. And I said, during the interview, the host was a very decent person, a very decent person. At least that interview was carried out in a very decent way. But I said, my appeal to racists in Britain and all. I'm not saying the Brits are racist. I'm saying I'm appealing to the racists in Britain, and that is that you should become anti-war, because if you don't want all these brown people and people like me and to come to your country, you should stop the wars, because every time they destroy a country, people come to you.
Right. How do we complain about refugees when we create the refugees? Like, what is that?
Yeah, so you should be the most anti-war faction in
what?
Politics.
Yeah, it's
sort of wondering how to respond to that. Is there something wrong with what he's saying?
No, it's funny because actually I had a conversation once with someone who was like against bombing Syria because they didn't want refugees, and I wasn't sure what to say. I was like, thank you, but also screw you.
So if there are no refugees, it's okay to bomb them.
Right, that's kind of the thinking,
But at least you could say to him, well, then be against the bombing so that you don't have refugees if that's your problem.
Yeah, it's I call it the woke right.
Even
that's
if
my
you're
nickname
not humane,
for it.
But at least for your own selfish interest, you should be anti-war.
Right. The woke right. They're aware but not too much. And, Professor,
the woke left are the same. There's no difference.
Yeah. In regards to Kissinger, because we mentioned him a few moments ago, I wanted to ask you if there's anything in specific about Iran, that a story or some anecdote that you wanted to talk about in regards to Kissinger, because everyone is celebrating him as the geostrategist, the best diplomat to ever live, etc., etc. And I mean, we already know that it's that's obviously not true. But in regards to Iran, is there anything that we can say about Kissinger?
Well, I mean, Kissinger supported the Shah. He was always hostile towards the Islamic Republic and the revolution, and always supported the Israeli regime. And he was always hostile towards countries which Iran supported. Iran was supportive of the Latin American governments that were able to become independent of the United States in the 1980s. Iran gave a lot of aid to Nicaragua in particular, and helped the Sandinistas. But I mean, Kissinger's been everywhere. I mean, it's like, you know, he's 100 years old, and you know, if you remove his childhood, or it's like 80 years of evil. So that could be a world record.
Yeah. You know, I said this the other day. I absolutely, you know, I really sympathize with him as a child, because, you know, his family, they're German Jewish. They had to flee Nazi persecution, and you know, just that, experiencing that alone, it's very traumatic. But when he becomes an adult and he's like, you know, becoming involved in politics, why does he just so evil everywhere? He should be the last person on earth to do these things. And he was meeting with apartheid South Africa, and yeah, I don't understand what shapes or people like him, or why they decide to do the things that he did.
Well, you know, first of all, this whole issue of the Holocaust, if someone is going to if someone's parents or someone's ancestors were survivors, you would expect them to be more humane, not less.
Absolutely.
Humane. And but you also see how people like Kissinger are hostile to the Russians. I mean, actually the biggest Holocaust was against the Slavs, against the Russians.
Yeah.
But Russians, because they don't like the Russians, they're not included. I mean, the Russians lost almost 30 million people.
Yeah, the Germans,
that's way more than everyone else.
The Germans viewed them as like inferior. Yeah. So, yeah.
And then, of course, in China, I think the number of people who were killed by the number of Chinese who were killed were like 13, 14, 15
by the Japanese. Yeah.
By the Japanese. So, but you don't see that anywhere. So, you know, these, I mean, if you're going to be humane, if you're going to look through the eyes if you're going to be looking at the world through the eyes of someone who's witnessed injustice and you want to rectify it, then why would you ignore the Russians? Why would you ignore the Chinese? Why would you try to prevent when you're giving Saddam Hussein chemical weapons? Not like in Syria, where there are 3 or 4 cases of chemical weapons being used, and of course we know they were false flag operations. And
you survived a chemical weapons attack.
With the chemical weapons that Saddam Hussein used were infinitely more. You know, they were. It was like factory produced chemical weapons. There were factories that were producing these chemical weapons. Hundreds of thousands of people were injured by these chemical weapons. They were used on a daily basis during military operations. Hundreds of planes would bomb areas, and you have, you know, artillery, you know, striking targets day and night. Nothing compared to anything in anywhere else. This was industrial genocide, you know, being attempted by the West and Saddam Hussein together. You know, the West gave him chemical weapons. The West gave him the military intelligence to use those chemical weapons, and the political government cover to get away with it. If someone like Kissinger had any sense of humanity because of his family past, he would be the #1 person to oppose gassing people.
Yeah,
I was gassed twice. Many people never survived. Many people died a very slow and painful death. Many people in Iran continue to die as we speak, a slow and painful death. 30, 40 years of suffering. So it's almost, the first chemical weapons, I think, late 1980s. I don't know, because the Iranian calendar is a bit different from the Western calendar, but let's say 1982, 1983. It's like almost 40. Some people were gassed 40 years ago, and they still survive, or they gradually die, or they just can't breathe. Or if, let's say, they go into a room which has been, or let's say a room where they painted the walls recently, that person could have an attack. That person could then die as a result of that attack. So people are still, so many people have suffered and died as a result of these chemical weapons. But, whether it's Kissinger or anyone else in the United States, none of these elites in the West or the Green Party in Germany, they don't have any sense of humanity. They are the most immoral people that I can think of. Actually, once after 2009, and I don't want to take up too much of your time here, but I already have. But
no, it's the other way around, Professor.
You're kind. But after 2009, this German delegation came to Iran, and they were the head of the delegation was from the Green Party, some lady, I don't remember her name. I think she's an important person now. But in any case, she was wearing this green band because she was supporting the Mousavi camp in Iran and so on. And of course, it's not her country, but that's what she did. So she came to our campus and to the faculty that I worked in, and there were these other German MPs there too. There were like 5 or 6 of them. And then she was lecturing us about how evil Iran is and how terrible Iran is and all that. And then I said, I'm a war veteran. I survived chemical weapons. I survived your chemical weapons. Many of my friends died. And actually, one of my colleagues in that faculty, his brother died a couple of years later after this. I didn't mention him because I didn't know that his brother was injured due to chemical weapons, but he died a couple of years after this meeting. But in any case, I said many are dying, many died, and I said all that. And I said, if you had any humanity, you'd try to arrest your own government officials. You'd try to put them on trial. You would go back to Germany and call for compensation for the hundreds of thousands of Iranians that have died or who were injured or have suffered, or their families, and you would apologize to the Iranian, but you have no morality. You are void of morality. You're completely dishonest. This is all a facade. You want to pretend that you're humane, but you are completely inhumane. And after this, to their credit, 2 or 3 of the MPs came to me and said, look, she's just, basically listening, she is nonsense, ignore her. This was shameful and all that. But in any case, that's how they are. That's how many, I'm not saying all the elites like that, but that's how most of them are. The Green Party, the Democrats, the Republicans. They speak about the Holocaust, but what about the Slavs? What about the Russians? What about the Chinese? What about the Iranians? What about all the people who suffered? How about the Libyans and the Syrians and the Yemenis and the Venezuelans who die even as we speak? People die as a result of these sanctions, whether it's Iran, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Cuba, but it's just normalized. But it's happening.
Yeah, it's not just sanctions. I mean, they sell, Germany, as you know, they still sell weapons to Saudi Arabia, despite this, this false position that they don't get involved in wars and so on. And then you look, just look at the Ukraine. Now it's like in the open. We're, don't they see the irony?
Merkel admitted, and again,
but Minsk,
very politically aware people. But she basically admitted that the Minsk talks, the negotiations over the Minsk 1 and 2, were to buy time. So that Ukraine could build itself up. So they could build up its army. So it wasn't sincere. And then, of course, Hollande said the same
Exactly,
thing.
the French president, yeah.
President of Ukraine. So this was all, and this shows that you just can't trust the West because
Yeah, are you surprised when you hear these things, given that you're coming to the Vienna talks, which are also with the West?
Yeah, that's what they did to Iran in 2015 over the JCPOA. They did negotiations with Iran, and then they cheated Obama and the rest. They cheated Iran from day one. Trump ultimately tore up the deal, but Obama was cheating Iran because they were never sincere. The Iranians were sincere. They abided by all their commitments, and the Americans and the Europeans didn't. And this is again what we saw with the Minsk Accords, and then she has the audacity to say this out in the open. And of course, the Western media doesn't even
It's crazy,
talk about it.
really. They have no shame.
I don't know if you recall. You probably do because you know these things better than me. But I don't know if maybe you don't. I don't know. It was the U.S. Secretary of State during Obama, Kerry.
Yeah.
He was at the UN talking to the so-called Syrian opposition.
Yeah.
And then there was this video, there was this voice, there was this recording that was leaked. And in it, he admits that we allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus to put pressure on Assad.
Yeah, this hot mic moment. I remember it. Yeah.
It was a recording. But when this came out, what the Western media picked up, what was important to them was that he said like a curse word and said, I lost something I don't remember exactly. People could look it up. I lost the debate over attacking Syria in the White House. That was what the big news was. That's what was like CNN.
They focused on that instead of like.
But the real issue was we allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus.
Yeah.
You allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus. That's unbelievable. And the same was true in Iraq when ISIS was advancing on Erbil, Erbil, but more importantly on Baghdad.
Okay.
Americans didn't intervene. They wanted to put pressure on Maliki.
Yeah.
They allowed ISIS to advance.
What happened to the war on terror? I thought, they are enemies with Al Qaeda and with ISIS, and they're there to, to protect us, the brown people from from the others. Yeah.
But this is a tradition, whether it's the Contras or whether it's ISIS or Al Qaeda or the Nazis or whatever. That's how they do things. They use the worst of the worst, whether it's in Afghanistan or whether it's in Ukraine or Nicaragua or Iraq, and they try to get their way.
Yeah.
Just like how they use sanctions.
But one thing that you mentioned, Professor, earlier with the chemical weapons attacks on Iran, which actually happened as opposed to the bogus ones in Syria. You survived 2 of those attacks, and I find it interesting because, as you said, there's never been any compensation, whereas in the United States, you are allowed to go and sue Iran in federal court for damages, and then the United States will kind of steal that money from Iran. Yeah, so where's the compensation to you, to the people who to the families whose family members perished from these chemical weapons attacks? Where's the as you mentioned the justice inside Europe, inside Germany for using chemical weapons on another country? I mean, these are supposed to be banned, right? We've made all these conventions and then we don't actually abide by them. The Vienna talks and the Minsk talks, it just shows how, and of course the 4+2, it just shows you how you just cannot trust Western diplomats. And I think that's such a stain on Western governments, because it's one thing already that we know politicians lie, but the diplomats are engaging with other governments and giving their word and inking documents, and they just, it's like toilet paper for them. They have no respect whatsoever for their own word.
Richard, 2 of my darkest memories, I'm not saying they're the 2 darkest memories. I don't know if I have a darkest memory. I'm not really good at these things. What's your best memory? What's but 2 of my darkest memories. One was, both have to do with chemical weapons. Not my own You know, when in my first experience with chemical weapons was with nerve agents. We were bombed, and it was during the Khaybar operations. The second was near the end of the war, which was mustard gas,
Christ.
and that was really bad. Very bad experience. Even though I was suffocating through the nerve agents, and I couldn't breathe, which was, you know, a very terrible experience itself. But the mustard gas was worse because, and this is why, because it goes back to one of the two really bad experiences I had, Dore. After the Valfaj 8 operation, which was when Iran liberated or captured the Fao Peninsula, Saddam used chemical weapons extensively, and mustard gas in particular. And some of my friends, they were working in a hospital in Tehran to help patients, and they were chemical. They were, you know, combatants who were injured through chemical weapons. And they told me to come and see what they were dealing with every day and night. They were working there day and night. So I went to the hospital. This was the Imam Hussein Hospital near Imam Hussein Square. And there were combatants lying on the ground in the hallways, in the rooms. They were all over the place. And they had huge blisters everywhere, around their eyes, around their mouths, under their armpits, and sensitive parts of their bodies. It was the most horrific thing I'd seen in my life. It was unbelievable. And they were not like 1, 2, 10, 15, 20. There were hundreds lying around, and there was no room for them. And then and it was like humiliating, because these were like young men, and then you had these nurses and others who had to take care of them, their sensitive spots. They had to put cream on, the medicine on the different parts of their bodies. And many of these people, by the way, die later on because of cancer, because like their lungs are corrupted and whatever. So when I was hit with that mustard gas, and this was like during the last weeks of war, when I had a mask on, and the smell came in, so I can smell the mustard gas, which is pretty bad, because I was wearing my mask, and it was coming in. So you were sort of like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And the whole time I was thinking about that hospital and those people, and like, well, how is this going? Am I going to be like in the hospital in such a situation like these young men? I don't want that to happen to me. I'd rather die than be taken to a hospital like that. The second was, and I said this before, in going to Halabja after the attack. I wasn't there during the attack. I went there after the attack, soon after the attack. And all the bodies were taken, but like we went into these different houses to see if there were any people alive or dead.
I see.
It was a ghost town, but there were like these cats and whatever. But there were no. The cats were really, I don't know. I sort of remember the cats, but that was like, even though I didn't see any dead people. But one of the things about the Iranians is that they halted. It was a victorious operation. They had liberated these areas with the Iraqi opposition and the Iraqi Kurds, including Halab and other places, and they were moving forward very fast. And then when Saddam gassed Halab, killing, I think, like 6,000 some hundred people, over 6,000 people, the Iranians halted their military operation to take care of all these people. So all the helicopters and the equipment, everything was mobilized to take out all these. So instead of fighting on, taking advantage of the situation, the Iranians stopped and said, we have to deal with this catastrophe. And The UN didn't condemn this. The Western media was silent about it. And this only became a big thing when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Then suddenly CNN, which suddenly was, that was the beginning of the rise of CNN, and
Yeah.
like the American, and back then it was Bush, the father, started saying how Saddam Hussein invaded his neighborhood. Well, no, you use chemical weapons against his neighbors. No, you use chemical weapons against his neighbors, because those chemical weapons were given by Germany and by other countries, and the military intelligence were given through the Americans, and the political cover was given by the Americans and its allies. You gassed the Iranians, you gassed the Iraqis, just like Saddam Hussein. Otherwise, if you're going to look for the guilty person, it's the pilot. He pressed the button, and everyone else is innocent. No, the Americans were, but the American media, the BBC, all of these media outlets, they only made this a big thing after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And then later on, they destroyed those chemical weapons. You know the story, we all know the story. But despite the fact that they had destroyed the chemical weapons that they gave to Saddam.
Exactly.
Later on, they invaded Iraq, claiming that he had chemical weapons. They created Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. The Taliban, Al-Qaeda, these groups, they were brought about by the U.S. alongside the borders with Pakistan, the madrasas,
Exactly.
The story of Al-Qaeda. They created Al-Qaeda, and then they invaded Iraq in the name of fighting Al-Qaeda. So through lies. So, the hypocrisy is so multi-layered.
It's stunning and multi-layered, truly.
It's just like, it just makes you tired.
Thank you for sharing that. Although I can't begin to contemplate what that's like, and it's very shameful because you think this is. I think obviously you and I and most of the planet, even though Saddam's not an angel, we still don't accept what happened in 2003 with the invasion.
Absolutely.
Right, but the thing is that an Arab country.
My first interview was on what is it, ITN? What is it? The British.
There's ITV, yeah.
ITV or whatever. They had branches in every part of Britain, and I think it was the Midlands, Midlands branch. And my first interview on television was with them. And they asked me why, because I was a part of the anti-war coalition from the beginning, even before the invasion of Afghanistan. I think the first protest was actually in Birmingham, where I was, on campus. There were like 50, 60, 70 of us, and Blair was coming to inaugurate the Institute for European Studies or something like that, some building. Okay. We were protesting there. I think that may have been the first protest. So I was against Afghanistan, even though the Taliban and Al-Qaeda was Al-Qaeda, and I was opposed to the war in Iraq, even though Saddam Hussein was Saddam Hussein. And in the interview, I said, the reason why I opposed the war in Iraq, because it was right before the war, was because the Americans and its allies do not have the moral legitimacy to attack Iraq.
Yeah.
Right. They are guilty as hell. They created Saddam Hussein. Yep. They destroyed Iraq. They are in no position to do anything about Iraq or any other country on this planet.
I just find it shameful that it's an Arab country, and it's especially Iraq, Mesopotamia, right? Originally, that this is the cradle of civilization. That Iraq became, or shall we say, Saddam did these things because he was basically acting at the behest of the Americans, with American support, doing their dirty work for them, because people perhaps know the dates, that it's 1980 to 1988, but what happened the year before? It's the Islamic Revolution. So one of the main catalysts for
they pushed them for war against Iran.
Exactly.
And then the irony, another irony, another one of those layers, is that they gave him chemical weapons. Okay, they invaded the country, or they attacked Iraq because of chemical weapons, but they themselves use depleted uranium in Iraq.
Yeah, Fallujah, yeah.
They use depleted uranium against Iraqis.
And phosphorus.
Was one of the most disgusting chapters of the whole affair in Iraq, but they used depleted uranium.
Yeah. Yeah, for the viewers who don't know, this is basically, well, you know, as the name implies, it's uranium, which is radioactive, and they put it inside the tank shells because when you fire a shell that has depleted uranium, it has better armor piercing capabilities, so it works better against other tanks or, you know,
whatever target there is.
Yeah, right. And it's kind of funny because what mechanized army were they fighting anyway in Fallujah? There was none.
It's a town.
Exactly. So there wasn't even any military.
Tanks.
Yeah, there were no tanks. There was no military justification or strategic justification anyway to use them. And and we're in 2023, and people are, you know, they're finding out now. People from Fallujah that they have cancer, that their you know, their children are born with birth defects. They have more birth defects, congenital heart disease in Fallujah than in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which were nuked.
Well, now they're going to have a competition in Ukraine.
Yeah, right. They're using them in Ukraine. They are. I don't know if that's being said on the news. I doubt it, but yeah, it's.
The British don't send depleted uranium not to be used. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's. You know, Professor, really, you know, basically unpacking all of these things, it's really multi-layered horrors, and especially horror,
and it really can't be unpacked because every time you unpack it, it hurts you in a different way.
Yeah, especially for you actually experience.
When you think about it again, it's sort of different from the last time you thought about it.
Yeah. You know, I've only heard of mustard gas on television or in movies, and it already looks pretty bad on a TV screen. I can't imagine what it's like when you saw this. And
bad because he gassed people. Well, you gas people.
Yeah, how does that make you any better? And especially it's Germany again.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
they do everything. They you know, if it's the Holocaust against the Russians, ignore it. If it's the Holocaust against the Chinese, ignore it. If it's against the Yemenis, ignore it. If it's chemical weapons against Iranians, ignore it. Or against Iraqis, ignore it. You know, so obviously, you know, they have whatever they say, it's not for moral purposes. There's no morale, even if when they speak of the Holocaust in Europe, which is their own crime. It's
their own crime. Yep.
It's their own crime. It's no one else's crime. They're not saying it for the sake of humanity. They're not saying it for moral. They're saying it to use it to justify other crimes, and that makes them anti-Semitic, because if people don't believe in the Holocaust or they deny it, it's because they say that the West lies about everything, because they hide all these crimes. So they don't believe anything they say. So a real crime, one of the many crimes committed by the Westerners, is not looked at, or it's ignored, or it's not believed. It's not believed in. They don't believe in it because of the behavior of the West, because of the immorality of the West. So
what's incredible,
they are being anti-Semitic by politicizing and weaponizing a crime to hide other crimes that in many cases are much more horrific, even in absolute numbers. They've destroyed the whole of West Asia. They've destroyed the whole of West Asia, from Lebanon to Syria to Iraq. They've hurt so much of Iran, Afghanistan, Yemen. Tens of millions of people have been displaced. Millions have been killed. North Africa, add that to the list. So, you know, the horror. This is, you know, if this is not 5 or 6 million people dying. This is hundreds of millions of people either displaced or suffering or others dying. They've destroyed a big part of the planet.
You have
And
many Nazis who. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Professor. I just wanted to add to that. You many Nazis actually became leaders or top brass in NATO, right?
Of course.
So, it's like the same people. They just keep going, and
so who's anti-Semitic here?
Europe is
so real victim. So
yeah, and they try to, like, European countries, like whether it's Britain or it's Germany or Spain that have had centuries of anti-Semitism. They try to, like, dump that on Arabs for opposing, Israeli occupation, like as if you can. They have nothing to do. That's a European thing.
Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah, this is European. Keep it European. It's got nothing to do with Palestinians.
The Jews had to go to North Africa.
Yeah.
For safety.
Yeah.
But in any case, I mean, there's just so much out there, and the hypocrisy is so multi-layered and so disturbing. But then if when I discuss this with many of these Western journalists, they just say, but what about like this? It's like, it's not important. It's just something it doesn't register for them, or at least they want it to register.
Professor, I wanted to ask you any news about the nuclear talks, because there's something yesterday about with the IAEA and I think it's Murray Vaughan. There was news in regards to that, but on the nuclear front, will we be seeing you again soon in Vienna?
Well, I can't comment on the JCPOA. Well, that the talks last year in Vienna were to protect the JCPOA because the United States cheated Iran on the JCPOA. So these talks were intended to create mechanisms so that the Americans couldn't cheat again. And they bore fruit. The text was prepared. At the end of the talks in Vienna, as you know, the European Union gave a text which met almost all of Iran's demands.
Mm-hmm.
For the protection of the JCPOA. And then the Iranians, when they took it home, they made 2-3 small changes. Joseph Borrell said that the Iranian demands are reasonable. So there's an agreement on the text. So everything was finished back then. But then the midterm elections happened and the Americans delayed. And then, of course, with the riots in Iran, the Americans and the Europeans miscalculated. And the anti-Iranian lobby pushed them away from a deal, which has delayed things so far. But in any case, when it comes to Murray Vaughan, as you pointed out, this shows that the Westerners were lying. So they raised a bunch of accusations against Iran. 2 of those key accusations have been proven to be lies, just like the rest of their accusations. So the Iranians were right all along. In Murray Vaughan, it turned out that there was no evidence that of what they were claiming. And then with regards to particles of enriched uranium at 83%, the Iranian argument was correct all along. So these 2 issues were resolved, as the Iranians said from the beginning, that these are lies directed towards Iran. And when the West does these sort of things, it makes Iran more careful at the negotiating table, because they know that the West, they can make up a lie. If the case is not properly closed, they'll make up another lie tomorrow. The Israeli regime, MEK, and all these anti-Iranian groups and the Western media, everyone will be mobilized to make new accusations and reckon the deal.
Yeah.
So this is a step forward. This is a significant step forward, that the IAEA has basically admitted that the Western accusations, these 2 Western accusations, were lies. Right. They didn't say it that way, but that's what it meant. There's also some movement. It seems that some of the money that's been stolen from the Iranians and that's been kept in South Korea under orders from the United States, that money may be released. So
how much is it? It's like 3 billion, something like that?
It's about 7 billion.
Okay.
I think I don't know the exact number, maybe 7-8 billion. But there is some movement. The reason is, in my opinion, that the Americans and the Europeans have found out that they are not benefiting from these delays. The world is changing. Europe is in trouble.
Yeah.
The United States is, you know, they have bitten off more than they can chew. They have too many, they've created too many antagonists. And so as time goes on, Iran's peaceful nuclear program develops, it becomes more advanced. And by the way, one small footnote, if the Americans want to close the case, they could do it very easily. The IAEA is a politicized body. When South Korea, it made some very major, it violated the NPT in a big way years back. But the Americans, in a big way, they really violated their commitments. But the Americans quickly closed the case because South Korea is a U.S. ally.
Right.
So they solved the problem. If they want to solve it, they can. But in the case of Iran, they drag their feet. They cheat, they lie. But in any case, so on the one hand, the Iranian peaceful nuclear program has been developing. It's been expanding to their loss. And secondly, and more importantly, the world is changing. You see Iran's relations with Russia evolving. The Russians are very keen on developing greater ties with Iran, as I said earlier on.
Right.
Central Asia, China, and rapprochement with Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have shifted. So you see all these changes taking place. You see the changes in Latin America, so, or the president's visit to Indonesia.
Yeah.
So all these changes are taking place. The Turkmenistan, a senior figure from Turkmenistan visited Iran the other day, meeting the leader and the president, and important economic deals were made. The relationship with Iraq is also expanding. So the Americans are seeing that as time goes by, the sanctions regime is becoming less effective. So they lose by delaying. So maybe we are seeing some positive moves. I can't comment about a deal. I don't know what will happen. It depends on the United States. The text has been ready for 9 months now. They've been stalling, not the Iranians. The accusations that they've made, so far 2 of them have been proven to be bogus. So they're the problem, not the Iranians. If they want to solve the problem comprehensively, it's up to them. But there has been some movement, as I said earlier, but we'll have to see how these bits and pieces.
My favorite one, Professor, was when the Israelis blew up. It was not Natanz, it was another nuclear site in Iran, and destroyed one of the IAEA cameras. And they blamed Iran for not repairing it fast enough. It said nothing to the Israelis.
You know, why did Iran increase enrichment? Because the Israelis carried out that attack. So every time,
tit for tat,
what Iran does is that if they do something against you, Iran responds.
Yeah, and it's working.
The smart thing for the Americans is to stop the escalation.
Right. Yeah.
They escalate, they don't win. But you know, if the United States rethinks its policy towards Iran, of course Iran will rethink its policy towards the United States. But the United States also has to prove that they really changed. When they lie about their intentions with the Minsk Accords, when they lie about implementing the JCPOA, when they lie or about when they make accusations against the Iranian nuclear program, as we've just discussed, these lies have been exposed. Then the Iranians have every right to be careful. Otherwise, if Iran gives certain things up and doesn't get anything in return, then they lose leverage. That's what happened in 2015. So yes, if the Americans change their behavior, the Iranians will change their behavior. It won't change history. It won't erase history. You know, all the things that we said about chemical weapons and all these other crimes, supporting Saddam and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and Wahhabi extremism in Yemen and Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua, and none of these go away. Supporting apartheid in South Africa and Palestine, none of these go away. But if they change their approach, then they will see the Iranians change their approach.
Yeah, yeah, and again, 2015 was the best example of that. I think it, because it wasn't theory; it was put into practice where you had a deal and Iran respected it.
Yeah, they cheated from day one.
Right. That, and again, it's a new world, right? So lots of things that were expected to happen, or that people hoped to happen, are happening now on a much faster pace. And as I tell the viewers, the multipolar world is really something that you're seeing come into existence. It's not some dreamed up experiment. It's really taking shape.
And the tragedy in Ukraine, which NATO is responsible for more than anyone else, is, I think, right now, at the moment, the most important catalyst for these changes,
right,
for the decline of Europe and for the decline of the West and for the emerging multipolar world, even though it's a very dangerous moment in human history. But this change needs to take place for the empire to be brought down so that there can be a chance for other nations. We don't know what's going to happen in future because, there's so many problems, when it comes to food shortages, fertilizers, all the, there are many problems that the world faces today. Things could get much worse. But what is clear is that the unipolar moment was extraordinarily, it was an evil period, and it had to be removed. It had to end. Otherwise, there would be no hope.
Professor Marandi, thank you so much for your time. I've kept you for far too long. It's just difficult because I get drawn into the conversation with you and I lose track of time. So forgive me if I've kept you for longer than expected. I just wanted to show your Twitter so people can follow you. That's the handle right there. So S_M_Marandi. And here you'll find, if you look, you'll find the conversation with, or shall I say the lesson that Professor gave our esteemed colleague. So is there anywhere else people can follow you, Professor, or any website you'd like them to check out?
No, I've been removed from Facebook. My account was deleted. My account was also deleted from Instagram. So the only thing left is Twitter for now.
Okay, well, and of course, you have an open invitation here anytime, so don't forget that. And thank you again, Professor, so much.
I may show up.
But you better. Thank you so much. We've got about 1,000 people watching, so guys, please remember to hit the like button and to just leave some comments and share the video with your friends and family. So also, I'll just read one comment. Someone said, "Hurry up and build the bomb."
No, Iran doesn't need the bomb. Right? I think Iran's nuclear program, peaceful nuclear program, is a symbol of Iran's strength as a nation. But just as Iran has many other symbols. But what will bring down apartheid is the collective will of the people of West Asia. And apartheid will not last. Those of us who are old enough to remember, we didn't see the collapse of apartheid South Africa coming. Maybe people from inside South Africa saw things that we didn't. And back then there was no internet or anything like that. But the collapse of apartheid was something that I think surprised, at least it surprised me. I back then was an activist against apartheid, both in South Africa and in Palestine. But the collapse came very sudden and very swift because it was not sustainable. And the world is changing as the West declines. The Israeli regime declines because its power comes from the West. It's not a powerful regime. It spends all of its energy subjugating more than half of the population. And now even the pro-apartheid oppressors are divided,
Yeah.
and their backers are growing weak, and the people of the region are growing strong. We see Hezbollah, we see Syria, we see
Yeah.
Iran, we see Gaza, we see Yemen, we see the evolving relationships between Saudi Arabia and Syria and others. The world is changing. I'm not saying that it's over for apartheid, and obviously there are many spoilers, but hopefully in your lifetime, in the lifetime of my generation, people, Jews and Christians and Muslims will be able to live alongside one another as equals in the whole of Palestine.
Yes, inshallah, God willing. So, and I just wanted to add, they removed you probably from Instagram and all these platforms. I mean, not probably, but definitely, because you're saying things that they, that matter, and they don't want people to hear. That's really the,
if I recall, I was removed from Facebook because I posted a picture of one of my commanders in the war who had cancer because of chemical weapons. And they removed my post, and then I reposted it and complained about the removal, and then they deleted my account. Instagram, I don't even know why they did it.
On Instagram, they wouldn't even let you post the pictures of Soleimani. It's just like
but I was removed even before General Soleimani was martyred and murdered by the Americans. I posted a few things about, because there was, I don't want to go into it now because I was invited by the BBC to go to Lebanon at AUB.
I remember this. Yeah. You told me.
And then I was banned by AUB, the American University of Beirut, because the State Department told them that if you allow this person, Marandi, to enter the campus, you'll receive a major fine. So I didn't know, AUB didn't say this. Later on, someone from AUB, exposed this. And so at that time, I just posted a few things about, because some students protested and all that. And it was about that time that suddenly my account disappeared, and I sent a couple of messages, no responses, and that was the end of the story. So I wasn't actually using Instagram. I never really liked Instagram that much. So so I'm on Twitter for now until Elon Musk decides to remove me, because I don't believe that, unlike some people, I don't believe this faction of billionaires is more benign than that faction of billionaires.
Yeah, it's kind of like with Trump, like, oh, he's a good billionaire,
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Professor. Again, here's your handle for everybody to follow you there. And again, I'm most grateful and happy that I had you on. It's been far too long, and we should do these more frequently. If you'd permit me to keep you for it's my honor as well. Thank you so much, Professor. I really appreciate it. Take care. Thank you very much. Thank you. Likewise. Take care. Bye bye. Ma salama. Thank you. So everybody, that was Professor Mohammed Marandi. He's a professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran, and he's also during the nuclear talks in Vienna a media advisor to the delegation. Well, actually, he was doing most of the interviews for them, and an advisor, not just media advisor, but as an advisor to the delegation, as he was in 2015 when they had the first original negotiations. So it's a real honor and privilege to have him on. And if you want to find out more about the nuclear deal, please check out the playlist. I've covered it and done interviews with the Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister, with Professor Marandi, with Russian ambassador. It's all you'll find all of this in one playlist. So thanks for tuning in. Take care, and remember to drop a like on the video. Bye-bye. Sweden wanted to join NATO. They broke with their decades-long neutral stance. Turkey was one of the only countries, I think along with Hungary, that was saying we're not going to let you in, because you need to have consensus, right? You need all the members in NATO to say, okay, you can join. Their bid has kind of been in limbo because Turkey wanted to, extract several concessions. It was very clear that they really want to join NATO in Sweden, and they were doing everything they could to appease the Turks. And then this moron comes in front of the Turkish embassy and burns the Quran. I understand that in their point of view, this is freedom of expression, and you're in Sweden, you can do whatever you like. But you have to remember that if you're trying to get Turkey support, maybe wait until after you've gotten it. I mean, this is just dumb from a diplomatic level. They're doing everything to appease Turkey, and then because of one idiot, they let this go to waste. The Germans and the Americans have decided that it would be a good idea to send Ukraine tanks. German tanks against the Russian. Man, I'm perplexed by this. What do they think is going to happen? Because even if you can train the Ukrainian crews who are used to Soviet tanks to operate British tanks, and then you got to train them to operate German tanks, and then you got to train them to operate American tanks, and that's if they can even maintain the logistical supply line to work with these tanks, to keep them running. What kind of door are you opening now for the Russians to do? I mean, this is very clearly escalation. While Germany and the US are saying, yeah, we're going to give Ukraine tanks, the doomsday clock has been moved to 90 seconds to midnight. So this is basically, it's a measurement of how close we are to the end of the world, to the apocalypse, to annihilating the planet with nuclear weapons, right? And this is the closest it's ever been to midnight, okay? Midnight representing the end. Ukraine's most senior military commander has said that his forces need about 300 Western tanks. Over the last year, NATO allies in Eastern Europe supplied Ukraine with Soviet-era and Russian-made tanks that have been ground down or destroyed in constant fighting. Soviet-era and Russian-made tanks. Now, Ukraine, having been a Soviet satellite state and part of the Soviet Union, it was part of Russia, all of its military personnel being trained on Russian tanks. What do you think they're going to do with American tanks or German tanks, which they are not trained to operate? The Ukrainians know how to operate Russian tanks. That's all they know how to operate. The Ukrainians only use Soviet stuff, right? Until the last couple of years and until now. This is the first major influx of NATO weapons. And again, NATO has been training Ukrainian forces, but Challenger tanks, this is brand new. If they can't even use the tanks that they're trained to use, what makes you so confident they're going to know how to use a Leopard 2 or an M1A2 or a Challenger 2? Man, people train on those things for fucking months and years. Both of these home secretaries, okay, Suella Braverman and Priti Patel, both their parents came to the United Kingdom, and under their own laws as home secretary, they themselves would not have been able to come to the UK, to be born in the UK, and to have a life there. So the hypocrisy is so disgusting, I got what I wanted, I'm okay, I'm secure, I can live in the UK, I'm the home secretary now I'm going to shut the gates. Now I'm going to screw people that have literally nothing, that are so desperate they're, risking drowning in the Channel or the Mediterranean Sea. People have to resort to risking drowning. They have to resort to, hiding in trucks or swimming across the Channel, if everyone's ever done that, crossing the Channel because of her policies, because she forces people into doing that, right? So you literally have no choice. You have to be in the UK to begin the application. But what are people supposed to do? Just teleport, for 5 minutes, write down the form and just get out of the UK? This is ridiculous. She's a liar, just like the one, her predecessor, Priti Patel. Why is Germany reluctant to give the Ukrainians tanks? That's a really tough one. I wonder why. Germany has long refused to send its most potent weapons to countries in conflict, a byproduct of its legacy of starting World War II and World War I. That's horse manure, because Germany does send weapons to countries in war. Saudi Arabia is one of them. So to get around this, the trick that they use is they don't sell the tanks and the ordnance directly to Saudi Arabia. They move it to Italy, and then from Italy they sell it to the Saudis. So they basically just insert a middleman, and that's how they get around this very, honorable principle of theirs, which they never abide by. If you go and you look up the Yemen war, you're going to see weapons from fucking everywhere. The Canadians have been selling weapons and making money. Britain, the US, Australia, everyone. And the Germans are no exception. So this is, the idea is true, but they fucking send weapons. They goddamn do. They do. Do you see how they move like snakes? Do you see how they move like snakes?
They get the media to whisper in your ear, oh, don't go on strike. No, don't strike. It'll cripple the economy. Oh. No, it's not, you know, like giving the army 800 billion to fucking bomb, you know, 20 countries. That's okay. That money, we can spare that. But if you go on strike where, oh my God, we're going to lose like 2 billion a day, well, we can't afford that. You know, the Pentagon has been audited, I think 5 times now, and every single audit was failed. That means they don't know where the money's going. The Pentagon is like a black fucking hole that sucks trillions of dollars, and the government doesn't even know where the money's going. I can tell you where it's going. You don't need to audit the Pentagon. I can tell you, me, Richard Medhurst, that money is going towards drug deals, towards arms sales, towards arms purchases, towards CIA fucking budgets and embassy coffee. That's where that shit is going, man. That shit is going to the spooks. That shit's going to the bombers. That shit's going to the paramilitaries. That's where it's going. You don't need to scratch your head. That's where it's going. And apparently that's an acceptable loss. That's an acceptable use of American dollars and taxpayer dollars. But, you know, going on strike, oh, that's too much of an inconvenience. That's the fucking point, man.